Yeah, you do it. We'll just get right into it,
Get right into this, man. Talking
Broncos.
some dominant defenses right today, man. Probably the best one that's not remembered as they should be.
Oh, well, we'll get into that.
Like a shooting star, man. Just one season they put it all together. Welcome, everybody, to the Sports Experience Podcast. I am your host, Dom DiTolla, alongside my co-host, Chris Quinn, and today we're going to get into a little Denver Broncos action.
Yeah, I feel like we're talking Broncos all day today.
It's going to be Broncos all day.
Which I'm into, you
Yeah,
know?
it's a very special occasion, so I figure we're going to do this for a very special person, and some good stories are going to come out of this one.
Definitely.
So
I feel like I dropped the ball on this one, though. I was going to bring a 2-liter of Orange Crush just to have, but I just didn't. So just in case anybody's wondering where this is going, we're going into that 77 defense for the Broncos, nicknamed
the Orange Crush.
There you go.
Yep, the era of disco, dominant defenses, and zero offensive rules.
That's the way I like it, yeah.
And this is actually the last year of not only the 14-game schedule, but also of the defenses actually having an advantage over offenses in the NFL before the 78 rule changes.
Yeah, before we see quarterbacks essentially being protected as much as they could, before we see a bunch of stuff happening on the line.
Yeah, linemen can extend their arms, and then receivers can, like, not be murdered trying to run a pass route.
It's like, what do you mean I can't clothesline this guy into hell? You're just like, oh, well.
What do you mean he can walk after the play?
Yeah, exactly.
But anyway, we're going to get into the 77 Denver Broncos, and the most famous thing about this team, not only did they become AFC champions, but they had one of the most dominant defenses of all time.
Yes.
And the reason they were nicknamed the Orange Crush is not only would they crush the shit out of you, they were wearing the old Denver Bronco uniforms with the orange jerseys.
Which I love.
Oh, yeah. They were like that nice product of the old AFL. Because either the jerseys were really good or really bad.
Exactly.
Like the Broncos' oldest jerseys with the striped socks.
Exactly.
That they burned in a bonfire that the city held.
But it's one of these things where it's an iconic jersey with this team. Like, that's the jersey that I always think of, you know?
Oh, it totally is. So before we get into the Broncos of 1977, I want to take a trip down memory lane to them being in the AFL and them being basically the redheaded stepchildren that were beaten on in the AFL for that decade-long period. AFL, you're not familiar? Go back and listen to our AFL-NFL merger podcast. It's pretty dope.
Yeah, it explains it pretty well, but this is getting more into what a awful team the Broncos were.
It was run so poorly.
This is what I love.
No money.
Yeah, and we brought it up in our AFL-NFL merger, but you just brought it up again. They were the worst team with the worst uniforms. So, like, teams would show up and make fun of them for the game and destroy
It's
them.
like Bill Burr making fun of the Phillies. It's like,
yeah, with your brown striped socks selling fucking popcorn in the instructional league.
The Yankees won how many? Yeah, no, Bill Burr.
In their 10 years in the AFL, I went and did research on this. They had a league worst 44, 106, and 4 record.
Wow.
That's
so bad.
They finished last 6 times. In 1962, they had their only 500 season, a non-losing season at 7-7, where they finished second, and they finished 4th or 5th 2 times and 3rd out of 4th once. That was just horrible.
I can't even imagine being one of their fans.
And that's why they're so diehard. They were the first team ever in that city. Like, if anybody says Denver is a Rockies town or even an Avalanche town or even a Nuggets town, they are full of shit and did not grow up there in this era where this team, as bad as they were, meant everything to that city because it made them a major league city.
I was going to say, it was their first, it was their first real, and like you were saying, it makes diehard fans to have this, like, literally a decade of just losing.
And it's not like they had bad players. I mean, Frank Tripucka, remember the guy we talked about in the AFL podcast? One of the AFL's best quarterbacks. You know, you had Lionel Taylor at wide receiver. Marlon Briscoe was the first black quarterback and later a Super Bowl winner on those Miami Dolphins teams as a wide receiver.
I was going to say, so they had good players. They just couldn't put it together for the life of them.
Absolutely. And towards the end of the AFL, they finally acquire probably a franchise favorite. He just made it into the Hall of Fame. Floyd Little, who was a running back, had a lot of success in the AFL and NFL, but it's like they're not winning and not putting anything together.
It's got to be so heartbreaking to go out every single year and them being like, well, we almost got to 500 this year.
They were literally the franchise that the Chiefs, Raiders, Chargers, Patriots, what have you, kept in the basement and beat on and didn't see the light of day because they were gingers orange with no soul.
Oh, I was just thinking about them being the gingers of the league, and they so are. It's so mean.
It's mean, but God, was it true? I mean, between the bad uniforms and the bad play, but things started kind of turning around in 1973 after the merger. Despite the Raiders being really good, the Chargers have fallen off. The Chiefs are old, so there's now a little bit of a window in the old AFC West to where Denver might be able to compete. And in 1973, John Ralston comes in as their head coach. And he's a very important figure because he turns the franchise around. Because in 73, they go 7-5-2. And 73 is also important, which I'll get to when I discuss this defense. That kind of becomes the year where all of the young talent they start bringing in on that side of the ball. They finally start accumulating, and these young players are developing into really, really good ones.
Yeah, so they're picking up a lot of young defensive players in their draft, and they're shaping them into this defensive structure that I feel like we're alluding to here.
Yes, and in 1973, 7-5-2, and then in 74, they go 7-6-1. Well, they're not making the playoffs because they have yet to play in a postseason game by 1974.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, this team is starting to come together. They're missing a few pieces, but they're getting enough to where they're actually really good.
Yeah.
75, they have kind of a down year at 6-8, but 76, they go 9-5 and just barely miss the playoffs because 1977, I should add, is the last year of the 4-team playoff format.
Yeah, so this is pre-wild card,
Well, there's only one wild card because there are only 3 divisions, and you get the one wild card in. So 9-5 in a 14-game season is actually pretty darn good.
I was going to say, yeah, that's not a bad season. And if you're a fan at this point, you're getting excited, and you're definitely like throughout that season, you're like, oh shit, this is really turning into something.
Oh, it totally is. But the problem is after 76, John Ralston retires, which is kind of a blow to this franchise because he finally made them respectable.
Yes.
Like, they're out of the basement. They're in the kitchen now. Not getting a lot of sunlight, but they're out of the basement. And I think that's important.
Well, I want to talk about this because there was talk about him kind of stepping down for various reasons. What were the ones that you heard? Because I kind of heard that they wanted him out.
They did because he hadn't turned the corner.
Because
It's almost like with Dungy and the Buccaneers, how he completely turned them around, but they would just not break through.
Yes.
And then they give up, that king's ransom to get Gruden in there, and he spider 2Y bananas their way to a Super Bowl in his first year. Warren Sapp had a great quote about that. He's like, first day of practice, I see Coach Gruden. I'm like, man, we give up 2 first-round picks and all this other shit, and this is all we got?
Yeah, fuck. I mean, you really don't know until,
Oh, yeah, but what...
But that switch at the head, sometimes it really makes a difference.
And it does because they bring back former offensive line coach Red Miller. Red Miller is a rookie coach in 1977, and he has an ace in the hole because staying on that staff is the defensive coordinator, Joe Collier.
Yes.
Joe Collier, for those of you who don't know, I remember in our AFL episode, we talked about how good those Bills defenses were when they went back-to-back for AFL titles.
Yeah.
Joe Collier was the linebackers coach and basically architected those defenses. While he later became head coach for the Bills, he didn't do too well, in which that's why they drafted O.J. Simpson. But in 69, I believe, he signs with Denver and is tasked with rebuilding their defense. And the interesting thing about Joe Collier is he doesn't run a defense like the rest of the NFL.
Yeah.
The NFL is a copycat league, and when Tom Landry kind of invented the 4-3 and then later the flex defense, which he brought to Dallas, everybody was running 4-3s. And then in Pittsburgh, Chuck Noll and his defensive staff basically invented the cover 2, which is still a 4-3 defense, but it's built on 4 stout defensive linemen getting up the field and creating pressure so your back 7 can zone out and even man cover and just umbrella the entire field. Joe Collier, on the other hand, has different plans. At the time, Denver was really the only team in the league, and Joe Collier basically invented this, the 3-4 defense. And this is important because it's a very different schematic defense than the 3-4 in that in this one, and the credit to Collier because he tailored it to all the players that were being drafted and on this defense. And the 3-4 basically you have 3 down linemen. Their job isn't to necessarily get up the field. Their job is to eat 2 gaps at once. And when they know where the play is going, pick the correct gap and then go through it.
So unlike the 4-3, their job is more aligned to pretty much eat up the other linemen.
It is.
As opposed to like break it and put pressure straight on the quarterback.
Precisely, which is where your linebackers come into play.
Yep.
The linebackers in the 4-3, they're more designed for pass coverage and flowing to the ball, running it with speed, having one appropriate gap to go through and doing that.
And they're going to make your tackles on...
They're the big stat guys.
Yeah.
The guys in the 3-4 on the defensive line, they do all the dirty work. They hold up the blockers so the linebackers can just get after it.
Yeah. And that was definitely what I found researching. I'm definitely not as into football, but I've been getting way more into it. But they kept saying that the linemen have to be almost like the most unselfish players on your team.
They are. And when you look at famous 3-4 teams recently, the Steelers come to mind with guys like Casey Hampton and Aaron Smith and Brett Kiesel. They have to be unselfish and they have to be tough SOBs and not care that they're not getting stats.
Yes.
And this leads me to the linebackers. And this linebacking core was amazing because you had Randy Gradishar, who should be in the Hall of Fame.
That was the thing that I saw immediately when I clicked on him. There's like, we're trying to get this guy in the Hall of Fame because, I mean, look at these stats. But that's the stuff I love is we see these linebackers are really come to the forefront of this defense and become stars.
Yeah, and then you have Bob Swenson, who was an undrafted free agent out of Cal.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then you have Tom Jackson most famously for NFL primetime, but a hell of an outside linebacker. All these guys were quick, and that's what you need in this specific scheme. And then Joe Rizzo. Basically.
Yeah.
So you have these 4 guys patrolling and making all of the plays and really putting that crush in the Orange Crush because up front you have unselfish players like Barney Chavis, Reuben Carter at the nose, and the insane but amazing Lyle Alzado. I mean, you just have toughness and beef up front, which basically allows not only your linebackers to do well, but even your secondary just to become ball hawks because of all the pressure and different looks that's being created. So like their secondary, they had a young Louis Wright, Steve Foley at the corner, and then Bill Thompson, who was the old man of that defense. He was still drafted by them in the old AFL.
Yeah, I saw that about old Billy Thompson. He was like he was like 30 when everybody else, because this was a really young defense.
I had wrote it down. This is actually very interesting. 7 of the 11 guys were drafted or undrafted free agents by the team. 10 of the 11 were under 30. And 8 of the 11 came to the team 1973 and afterwards when they were acquired. Yeah, so I mean,
they straight up molded this defense.
Yeah, and Collier, to his credit, like he tried to experiment maybe with a 4-3 at the beginning, but he's like, I think I can do something different. And he definitely did because they were a turnover machine that year.
Yes.
They were just outstanding. As far as interceptions, Thompson had 5, Jackson had 4. Wright, Gradishar, Foley, and Rizzo, they all had 3. Freaking Swenson and Jackson each had 1 apiece. I mean, that defense was something nobody had seen and was just scaring people because it had finally gelled. And you're coming off a 9-5 season, so you're no chopped liver. You're going to be in the mix, even though the AFC in '77 was super competitive.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing that I feel like what you were harping on earlier is that it's a copycat league, and somebody finally breaks through the door, and they're like, "Oh, we can do that," and then we start seeing other teams kind of do this.
Oh, totally. No, down the line, and this season in particular.
Yeah.
They had 5 Pro Bowlers just on that side of the ball. Their offense had none.
Yeah, I know. That's the thing is.
Their offense had 0, but 4 of them were first-team All-Pros with Gradishar, Thompson, Jackson, and Alzado, and Louis Wright was a second-team All-Pro. That's incredible.
Yeah, they were definitely the greatest defense of that year.
But they do need a little bit of help, because even though you're 9-5 and you have all these young players rallying to the ball and kicking ass, you've gone 17 years in your franchise's history without making the playoffs.
Which is so sad.
Like, you're that redheaded stepchild. You're in the kitchen. You're ready to open that door and go out into a society that doesn't like you, like with the Raiders and Colts and Steelers. But no, you're ready, because that offseason, they're able to acquire a veteran quarterback.
Yes.
And while he's not a Hall of Famer, he was still a very steady, solid veteran quarterback who had played well in the league. He had taken a team to a Super Bowl. If it wasn't for Roger Staubach, Craig Morton, formerly of the Dallas Cowboys, would have probably still been starting for Dallas.
Yeah.
He was less reckless than Staubach. Landry liked that. The problem was, when the chips were all down, Staubach was winning games, and the important games. Morton wasn't. He was underperforming.
I feel like we see that.
Yeah. And in 75 and 76, what happens is, Morton goes to the New York Giants in a horrible trade made by the Giants, by the way. They ended up giving away, I think, the first or second pick in the 75 draft to Dallas.
Damn.
And what ended up happening was Morton has 2 god-awful seasons with the Giants. Just 2 god-awful seasons. The fans hate him. He falls out of love with football. But Denver needs a quarterback and just somebody to run an offense with not like a lot of stars, but does have some young and emerging talent. Just somebody to hold it down and not make mistakes. So they acquire Craig Morton.
I was going to say, you want a guy that understands game strategy, because your defense is really your star. You don't want a guy who's going to essentially try and take the game over himself. You want a guy who's going to understand what it is to win a game.
And it's a very, very smart strategy by them, because they're like, look, our defense is going to carry us. We know that.
Exactly. That's what they're going to rely on.
Don't make mistakes. And Morton throws for a modest over 1,900 pass yards, 19 touchdowns, only 8 interceptions, but has 4 rushing touchdowns. So he's just piloting an offense. They don't have a star running back. They have a group of like 5 running backs on their team. It's absolutely crazy.
Well, that's what you want from this quarterback. You're like, we want our defense to be the star, not their defense. So don't turn the ball over and we'll win.
Yeah, we just want to move the ball and get things done. They had 3 guys on their team with over 100 rushing attempts, with Otis Armstrong, Lonnie Perrin, and Rob Lytle. And then you also had Jim Jensen as well pitching in on the back end.
So they're pretty much just... It's a rotation on the running back.
It is. It's a running back by committee with this team.
Yeah.
And it really was throughout this era. And honestly, they really didn't have a dominant running back on their team from basically the time Floyd Little left.
Okay.
Until about Bobby Humphrey in the late 80s. And he didn't last very long because of contract issues.
Yeah.
But what you see, you also have, because this is the era of the NFL too, where the deep ball matters more. And they're lucky enough to have some solid pass catchers in a Haven Moses, in a speedy young Rick Upchurch, in a good tight end with Riley Odoms, and a good wide receiver, Jack Dolbin. So, I mean, their offense is solid. Just don't make mistakes and let Joe Collier and the Orange Crush figure this out.
Well, I feel like this is something that some people don't necessarily understand with the NFL is... It really all comes back to defense.
It does, because...
It more so than I ever thought growing up.
Yep.
Because it is so ridiculous how defenses take teams to Super Bowls, and then you see a quarterback like have maybe a good game, Tom Brady, and then they pretty much, people are like, oh my God, he's the GOAT. But I feel like every single time it's like that defense that year took that team there, and he kind of just... You know what I mean? Piloted an offense.
Exactly.
Hey, everybody. Just want to take a quick break to let you know that our Sports Experience podcast is brought to you by Engle Studio here, and they're here in Tucson for all your recording needs.
And in this era, this is the era for it, because you don't have the offensive rule changes yet.
Yes, exactly.
Because what everyone was doing outside of Denver was trying to copy Tom Landry, but nobody could run the flex, but you're still running a 4-3.
Yeah.
But then copying Pittsburgh. The Broncos said, oh, we got something new for you bitches. And that's what they did. And that year, they started off the season absolutely incredibly.
Well, it's so bold for them to do that, for them to just be like, everybody's doing this 4-3. We're literally going to do the 3-4. Like, I love it. It's one of these moments in sports that just changes it forever.
And it's the linebackers. It's Gradishar. It's Jim Rizzo.
Yeah.
It's Tommy Jackson and Bob Swenson just leading the charge for them. And they start the season off really interestingly at Mile High. They're playing the St. Louis Cardinals, not baseball. But what a lot of people forget is like in the mid-'70s when Don Coryell was their coach, their offense was loaded with Jim Hart, Jim Otis, Terry Metcalf was on those teams, Mel Gray. I mean, they were electric. Dan Dierdorf and Conrad Dobler up front. Denver wins the opening game against the Cardinals 7-0,
which
sets the tone for the whole season.
I was just going to say that the shutout is such an amazing thing in football that it literally, like you said, it sets the tone. They literally couldn't even get in field goal range. I mean, I wonder if they kicked one and missed, but it's so ridiculous.
And I mean, this is a team, and this speaks to how dominant defenses were of this era. Denver finished 3rd in the league in points per game. Do you know how many points per game they gave up that year? 10.6.
I was going to say
they were 1st in rushing yards against. They had 25 interceptions in 14 regular season games. Okay? 29 total turnovers. 1st against the run, as I said. Do you want to hear an even more incredible stat for this defense?
Of course I do.
In regular season games, they gave up 16 touchdowns.
It's so insane.
I don't even care how dominant defensively you are in this era. That is mind-boggling.
They literally are almost averaging a touchdown, giving up a touchdown a game. It's yeah.
But as
1.2 touchdowns a game, that's absolutely crazy.
It's complete dominance is what it is.
Yeah,
and
it really
doing
is.
Everything differently than everybody else.
It really is complete dominance. And like you were saying, I wonder if it's almost more so that teams have never seen this, so they can't scheme against it. But it's
still talent is talent.
It's still
and
talent.
Somebody like a Gradishar I wanted to bring up. He was like, a lot of these guys who are acquired on this defense are either cast-offs or mid to late round picks, or even undrafted free agents like Swenson. However, Gradishar was a first-round pick for them.
Yeah.
He was a first-round. He finished 6th in the Heisman voting in Ohio State his senior year. For a defensive player, that's incredible.
Yes.
But the thing about Gradishar that I always found interesting is he was as good, if not better, than Jack Lambert. And everyone knew that. Anyone knew that who played against him. He just didn't have the publicity or the headhunting mentality of him. But he was just as tough of a player. Walter Payton had a great quote. Dan Hampton had asked him later in his career, who gave you the hardest hit in the NFL? And Payton immediately answered like it was just off the top of his head. He's like, Randy Gradishar, 1978.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome.
And Walter Payton is one of the toughest, if not the toughest, football player in NFL history.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was their first round pick in 74. He was like kind of the golden child of that defense. And he played like it because not only could he rush the passer, not only could he play the run, he was incredible in coverage in that 3-4 defense.
Yeah.
He played on the inside because earlier in his career, they were running a 4-3 and out of middle linebacker. They moved him to inside linebacker. Lighting up as a right inside linebacker on the almost opposite hash as the tight end when you're running tight right, he was tasked with pass coverage of the tight end when he went up the seam. To have that speed, a lot of writers and a lot of, former players of that era said there were only 2 guys in the league who could do that. Jack Lambert and Randy Gradishar. Yeah. And
well, like you were saying, what you said was like the speed, but I feel like a lot of it comes into his football intelligence because you have to understand every play right away.
He was one of the smartest players of that era and one of the smartest linebackers, I would say, in NFL history.
I was going to say, because like if that tight end is open in that middle seam, he's just gone. So like, that's a really interesting one I'd never really thought of because like you were saying, when now we have 4 linebackers, so like he's a middle insider as opposed to just a middle.
This is the Orange Crush. This is what teams fear. This is what teams don't want to face. It's different.
Yeah, I love that.
It's new. And even though the AFC is really good that year, Denver keeps reeling them off. And I wanted to bring up probably their most important game of the season. They go to Oakland.
I was going to say.
Oakland is the defending Super Bowl champions. With Kansas City getting old in the early 70s, Oakland is dominating that division. But they roll into Oakland after giving up an early touchdown, so they're down 7-0. They reel off not only 30 unanswered points, They accumulate 8 turnovers in that game alone against Kenny Stabler, who just won the league MVP.
And a lot of people were saying that Oakland
won the Super Bowl.
Oakland was the best team in the NFL that year. They thought that they could go back to back.
Oh, easily. Yeah, everyone thought that they were hot shit. But Denver wins 30-7. And there's a great play in that game, almost salt in the wounds, because like now the redheaded stepchild is in the neighborhood.
Yeah, no shit. Now he's here.
Now he's here and he's ready
everyone
to unleash all of his fucking Opie Taylor rage on you. And the Orange Crush does. But there's a play where they call a fake field goal.
Oh, I love this.
Where Jim Turner is an old man at this point. He's their kicker. He was the kicker for the Jets when they won Super Bowl III almost a decade prior.
Yeah.
They run a fake field goal, and he's standing there wide open and just catches a touchdown pass, which is just like middle fingers to the Raiders. The Denver-Oakland rivalry, much like Kansas City-Oakland, San Diego/Los Angeles-Oakland, none of the teams like each other in that division. Like, Denver doesn't like Kansas City. Denver doesn't like them, San Diego, Los Angeles, and vice versa. But they all agree on one thing. Everybody hates the Raiders.
Yes.
I went to a game in 1997 with my dad at Old Mile High, and we're walking into the South Stands, which is like the rowdiest part, and it's snowing. They're playing Carolina, I think. And mind you, this is the year Denver wins their first Super Bowl.
Okay.
They start the year, I believe, like 7-0, but they lose. Their first loss of the year is in Oakland. This game is maybe like 2 or 3 weeks later than that Oakland game. And as we're getting into the stadium, we just hear this chant, and we can't figure out what it is. And as we're walking in, they're playing Carolina, and the entire crowd is chanting, "Raiders suck, Raiders suck, Raiders suck." So, I mean, that was the mentality, and it's been that way since the entire league started. And I'm sure Oakland being good after Al Davis taking over in the old AFL, when they started actually beating people and doing it in typical Oakland fashion, or Los Angeles or Las Vegas, whatever. The league's vagabonds for all I care. But
well, the Raiders are. That's what they are. And like you were saying with the redheaded stepchild, we keep bringing it back, but it's so accurate with the way Denver went through the league that these wins in 77 mean so much.
And I wanted to bring this up because they start out undefeated. They have another game in between, but then they lose to Oakland at home.
Oh, okay.
That was their first loss of the season. But do you know what they do? They don't go back into the basement. They start beating the AFC's best. Yeah. They beat Pittsburgh at home, who won their division. They beat Burt Jones, good episode, by the way, and the Baltimore Colts in another game, when Burt Jones is just lighting things up and making Bill Belichick's pants tight as an offensive or a defensive quality control coach or whatever the fuck he was.
He was just getting footballs.
Yeah, but they go into the last week of the regular season not only as AFC West champions, they have the #1 seed in the AFC by virtue of not only beating Oakland in their division, but by beating Pittsburgh in a down year and Baltimore, who...
I'm sorry, that was one of my favorite is Pittsburgh in a down year.
It was a down. They were 9-5. They barely won their division.
Come on,
Cincinnati
Steelers fans.
And Houston were doing pretty well at that juncture.
But I just want to point out that preseason, they were looked at as a good team. They went 9-5 the season before.
No, and
nobody thought that they were going to beat all of these teams.
No, and we talked about in our Burt Jones episode, they had been to the playoffs 2 straight years.
Yep.
Granted, they got the shit beat out of them, but you still have Burt Jones, and everything is still coming together. They're a quality football team. This could be, and it turned out to be, the end of their run in 77, and we'll get into that playoff game shortly. But Denver enters as the #1 seed. Granted, they lose their last regular season game. They only give up 14 points, but still lose to Dallas. But they finally make the playoffs. And they finally make the playoffs because of this incredible defense.
Yes. So they go 12-2.
They go 12-2.
A lot of people thought they should have went 13-1, but they lose to Dallas in this last game. And this will be brought back because...
Yeah, well, we'll get into that.
It's a little rough, but
oddity. But they're in the playoffs. The city's going nuts. It's Bronco Mania. That's what everyone refers to it as. The entire crowd is clad in orange. I mean, city's rocking. And they play their first playoff game that year on Christmas Eve, 1977. And
That's awesome.
I want to bring this up because my dad was home for winter break from college at the time.
Oh, yeah, all right.
Denver. He got to go to this game and later the AFC Championship game.
Wow, man.
The first two Bronco playoff games ever played. And they draw because there's only 4 teams that make the playoffs. And I believe the rule was, and I could be wrong, but I believe the rule was you couldn't play a wild card team from your own division in the first round.
Okay.
So Oakland has to go to Baltimore, and we discussed in the Burt Jones episode, you can go back and listen to it. I won't get into it because this is a Bronco episode, the ghost to the post game, which basically, even over Elway spurning them, in my opinion, ends professional football for the Colts in Baltimore. Breaks their hearts, double overtime loss. Dave Casper, great tight end. He'll come back in the AFC Championship game, makes an incredible over-the-shoulder catch like a center fielder to set up the game-winning field goal.
Well, and then we see football's not in Baltimore for many a decades.
Yeah, about a decade and a half.
Yeah.
But anyway, Denver plays a pretty good Steelers team. And people are kind of talking like, oh, they're a flash in the pan. And that was kind of the attitude all year. They're like, where did this team come from? And it's like, well, they've been slowly getting better. They got that nice little spark. They got Craig Morton, and they got the most badass bitch defense in the entire league.
Well, that's the thing that really I feel like turned the corner was their defense outplayed everybody else because everybody could see their offense really wasn't shit. I mean, they were fine, but they weren't.
Their offense was efficient.
Yes.
And I'd like to bring that up. And everyone always, and this is an Orange Crush episode because this is what this team is known for. But I just want to give credit to the offense and a really, really good offensive line, guys like Tom Glassick and Paul Howard on it. They got the job done.
Yeah, no, they
got the job done and what was needed.
But they didn't have those stars like we were talking about, like with a Burt Jones or like these other players. Staubach, you know what I mean?
And Craig Morton rediscovered football, the love for football.
That's
he was
more
the
77
AFC Comeback Player of the Year.
Oh,
was he as good as these quarterbacks he's beating? No, but he didn't need to be.
Yes.
He just needed to be the motherfucker in charge that said, let's put 20 up on the board and let the defense eat.
And that's what I love about him.
And in the game against Pittsburgh, the game's tied at halftime. It's 14-14. So, I mean, it's a close game. Pittsburgh's showing the heart of champions. Franco Harris, even though he's held under 100 yards, still has a pretty good day. Johnny Stallworth really comes into his own, and you'll see with the later Steelers teams, oh, we can pass now and have 2 Hall of Fame wide receivers and a Hall of Fame quarterback. Yeah. Let's do that.
Yeah.
But Denver really turns it on in the fourth quarter because it's tied 21-21 going into it.
Yep.
Tom Jackson comes to play in that fourth quarter. He has 2 interceptions in it. And Denver, although they can't get the ball into the end zone, they're up 27-21. After the second Jackson interception, this is what I love, and this is where I want to give credit to the offense is look at what the defense just did for us again.
Yeah.
Look at how they bailed us out. We're still ahead. We could sit on the ball, but they didn't. They didn't sit on the ball. Freaking Morton throws a touchdown pass to Jack Dolbin 34 yards when they could have sat on it to go up 34-21.
And
it ices the entire
game. Yeah, exactly. And that's the big thing is I bet the defense were at that point were just like, oh, thank God we don't have to do this.
Oh, exactly. It's like, oh, yay.
Yeah. It's such a turnaround for them because
but they slayed the first beast.
Yeah.
Because Pittsburgh had won 74-75. They're done. They're gone, which sets up the rubber match game against the Raiders.
Yeah.
Very rarely do you see teams meeting more than 3 times in a season.
Yeah.
And that only happens when you play a team in your division. Oakland's the wild card. Wild card, bitches. But they got to go play in Denver. And if you thought people were excited about beating Pittsburgh, getting another crack at Oakland back in Denver after losing to them earlier in the year is probably something everybody wanted.
I mean, I can't imagine the feeling of getting Oakland back. And then because of this rivalry, like we were talking about, like how everybody hates the Raiders. Like literally every team in this division just wants them to lose.
Yeah, nobody likes them. Nobody likes them. They're hated. They're hated, the Raiders. And in the game, despite going down 3-0, Denver's defense knocks Fred Biletnikoff out of the game.
Yeah, I saw that.
Foley just levels him from his cornerback position. And that's a huge blow to Oakland. Stabler is kind of banged up. And then Morton makes an incredible throw, gets all the time in the world, and drops this one to Moses. And he makes one juke kind of, and then just goes up the sidelines and cuts to the middle of the field for a 74-yard touchdown. And that just ignites the crowd.
Oh, yeah.
That brings all the momentum back. And these teams are playing it kind of close to the vest, you know. They both know each other very well. You know, don't let the cat out of the bag too early. But Denver really lucks out with a play. It's actually very controversial. One of their numerous running backs, John Keyworth, ends up scoring a touchdown to make it 14-3. The problem is the play earlier on the drive at the goal line, Rob Lytle fumbles the ball.
Yeah.
And while there's Raider paranoia over things like the tuck rule or the immaculate reception, you could put this one in that category. He fumbled the ball. What the refs did, however, on this play, whether it's because they hate Al Davis or they weren't paying attention or just not wanting to finish the play, they call his forward progress stopped before he fumbled. Very controversial, but Denver takes advantage. John Keyworth scores a touchdown, and it's 14-3.
Yeah, so essentially it's a missed call. It should have been a fumble. It should have been Raiders ball or, you know.
Yeah, it should have, at worst, it should have been Raiders ball at like the 1.5 yard line.
Yeah.
It probably still sticks in the craw of Raiders fans, although it's probably further down the list because it's not the immaculate reception or the tuck rule bullshit.
Yeah, they definitely have some on their list of just stuff to complain about. I mean, it's awful.
But Denver's kicking ass on defense. Yes. Again, they're making Stabler very uncomfortable. His best wide receiver, not named Cliff Branch, is out of the game. But like they do, as champions do, the Raiders rally, and Dave Casper ends up breaking free kind of in the fourth quarter and going off, much like he did against Baltimore the previous week.
Yeah.
And he scores a touchdown to make it 14-10, and it's kind of a back and forth for a little bit. And then Denver, keyed by a great taking advantage of the defense's awesomeness, Morton hits Moses for another touchdown to go up 21-10.
I feel like at that point, because of how great the Orange Crush is, when you're on the offense and you score over 20...
Pardon me, it was 20-10. They did miss. They did not.
Oh, they did
make the extra point, which comes into play because what ends up happening is Casper has another touchdown catch towards the end of the fourth quarter for 20-17.
I was going to say, this is my thought, is when you're on that offense and you score 20, you're like, oh, we're going to win this game. Mm-hmm. But this is why the Raiders were so good, was they're like, no, you're going to have to do better than that.
The problem was it was too little too late.
Yes.
Denver was able to run out the clock.
I'm just saying, like, it's like we were saying, like, this defense was so good that I bet the offense gets to a point where they're just like, there's no coming back to that. And it's not a huge lead. 20 points isn't shit.
I mean, the Raiders tried, but they couldn't do it. But the defense had 3 turnovers, and that's basically what turned the tide of really the whole game. And Denver and the Orange Crush defense finally make the Super Bowl.
Yeah, first Super Bowl. I want to talk about this 77 team real quick because I was reading something that I thought was so interesting. They make this first Super Bowl, and people in Denver, this is what I read, hold this 77 team above all other teams.
My dad did.
If you were in this era, this is your team. And you would tell other people that, like, no, Elway's great, whatever. This was the team.
It's the most special team.
Yes. It's the most special team. That's the thing that I absolutely love.
17 years of being losers.
Yeah.
And it brought pride to the city. And did they eventually get the ring? No. And we'll go into that. And we'll go into why the offense shit the bed so poorly in that Super Bowl. But everybody loves them.
Yeah.
Because they were the first you saw, I know I'll say it again, you saw the redheaded stepchild getting the shit beat out of him year after year after year, but you stayed loyal and you stayed loving this team. And for someone like my dad, how special it must have been to watch them beat the last 3 Super Bowl winners in successive weeks, to put you on the doorstep for a title as a city and as a franchise. That must have been just euphoric. That just must have been one of the best feelings ever just to witness, because it's like Denver's finally on the map in professional sports.
Yeah, but that's the sports feeling that every single fan goes for. Mm-hmm. And you don't like go in rooting for a losing team. You just end up rooting for a losing team, and then out of nowhere, it seems like you're just like, oh shit, we're a winning team.
Oh, we're a winning team. We're telling everyone to go fuck themselves.
Exactly. That's the best, is like when you start crushing.
Oh yeah.
So we're gonna get into the Super Bowl, which, you know, it's a downer, but it's a Super Bowl. That's my take.
And it's funny because they were only the second team to beat the last two Super Bowl champions in a playoff run to the Super Bowl. Do you know who the first was? Because we did an episode on it.
Wait, who was the first?
The Miami Dolphins team that won that Chiefs game. But they draw Dallas in the Super Bowl, which is actually really unfortunate for them, because Tom Landry knows everything there is to know about Craig Morton. And the rest of the team does too.
I was going to say, we see them, they gave them their last game of the season, and it's kind of foreshadowing that the Cowboys really know how to beat the Broncos.
They do. And to Dallas's credit, you have Roger Staubach, you have Tony Dorsett, you have a great offensive line, you have the doomsday defense. It's not like they were slouches. It's almost like that Raiders Buccaneers Super Bowl where Gruden's like, oh man, I put this offense together. I know how exactly to break it.
Yeah, no, seriously. That's a great little analogy there, because that's what we see here is the Crush just can't get going.
Well, the Crush can't get going through no fault of their own.
Yeah.
The offense has 7 turnovers in this game. The fact that the defense only gave up 27 points, one of which was a late touchdown on a halfback option from Robert Newhouse to, I think, Golden Richards, that's incredible. 27 points with 7 turnovers. I mean, there was nothing they could have done.
No.
Not to completely fault the offense, because the defense still has to make plays, but when you're giving up 7 extra possessions, eventually they have to, law of averages says they even have to kick field goals.
I was going to say the real law of averages is they're going to score like at least 3.5 touchdowns off of those, or something like that, or at least 3.5 scoring opportunities. You know what I mean? So either field goal, whatever. But that's the thing, is like you were saying, is like they just gave the ball up too much for the defense to do anything.
But when you watch that game, what you see is they never quit. That defense never quit. Yeah. They never felt they were out of it. Even in the fourth quarter, they're only down 10 points. It's like they still thought they were in the game, and we're just like, Jesus Christ, just put some more points on the board for us. Like we can score, but it's much harder for us to score when we don't have the ball.
Yeah, no. And that's what's unfortunate about this season is they get right to the end, the defense takes them all the way, and the offense just can't get them over that hill.
And it's sad, because that was kind of their little window to do it. While they win the division in 78, and the defense is good up until through the early 80s.
That's what I read.
And Collier coaches defense, and they're still a good defense. He coaches until the end of 1988 with this team.
Yeah. And
we'll get into that in the next episode on the other side of the ball. But I'm just saying, like, he was the architect of all this. He was the mad scientist. And, you know, they make the playoffs in 78. They end up losing. Even in the early 80s, they're competitive. But by 83, the entire thing is turned back over to Elway.
Yep.
Collier's still coaching guys up like Carl Albino Rhino Mecklenburg and Simon Fletcher and Dennis Smith. I mean, but this was the team. This was the defense of the team that means probably more than anything to any Denver Broncos fan over the age of probably, I'd say, 50.
Yeah. That's what like I said, that's what I love about them is other teams almost have done more. So they've had more Super Bowl appearances, if you will. But this is the team that every diehard Broncos fan will bring up.
Because if they saw them, they will always bring this team up.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. This is just a stock message at the end of every episode. We hope you enjoyed whatever athlete and or team that episode was about. Just want to say, give us a quick follow on all social media. We have a YouTube channel, the Sports Experience Podcast, and we're on Instagram, DiTolla Dominic, and myself, C. Quinn Comedy. So give us a follow all around. We're always recording right here at Engle Studio. Thank you all very much.